And actually, I think that is the perfect segue into something that you wanted to talk about. So take it away.
Yeah, I know usually I try to play good cop and come with the good news when I do my segment. Unfortunately, this is not as good news, but I think it's a very interesting thing to look at. So, the news cycle is finally off of constantly dissecting and reanalyzing the results of the 2020 presidential election. But those results are still reverberating and influencing the direction of party politics. For the left, one of the biggest questions the 2020 election raised is which party is the party of the working class? Are we watching a realignment in real time of workers finding a permanent home in the Republican Party? And if this is true, how do we stop it? By now, we know that Biden was carried to victory by a huge shift of affluent suburbanites to the Democratic Party. Trump still won 40% of union households in the 2020 election. And now we're seeing some political figures openly flirting with the idea of making the Republicans the party of the multiracial working class, in the words of Marco Rubio. And Little Marco also shed light on these contradictions by penning a very weird op-ed showing tepid support for Amazon workers in their union drive. So how do we make sense of all this? What could this mean for keeping working class people from drifting to the right, let alone building an independent Labor Party? Though Trump's approach to workers and unions may have seemed different and innovative, it really wasn't. Whether consciously or not, Trump operated from a similar playbook to Richard Nixon. Both Nixon and Trump understood the importance of appealing to a blue-collar working-class base, and both saw the opportunity to disorient the Democratic New Deal coalition by doing so. Except Nixon was much more sophisticated in his strategy of breaking away working-class people, especially union members, from the Democratic Party. If there was one moment or one event that seemed to highlight the opportunities Nixon saw for this, it was the Hard Hat Riot in May of 1970.
4 days after Kent State, a massive demonstration in Lower Manhattan set off legions of hard hats whose rage had been building for years.
It was never planned to explode, but it did explode. Well, I was on Water Street, and we all just headed towards Broadway, and all you could hear was just shouting in senses of let's get the bastards and let's finish this once and for all. And there was some blood spilt. But it was all in anger, all in vengeance. Let's get them. And a lot of people, including myself, was releasing the hate and the feelings that you had. Of course, a lot of us felt winners. We felt very proud. We scattered the enemy.
The hard hats were heroes for a few days, praised by Wall Street workers, given free coffee by area luncheonette owners.
Now, there are a lot of details about this event that are often overlooked, like the fact that many workers were paid to leave their shift, and polls afterwards showed that a majority of building trades workers actually disapproved of that violence. But for many people, this solidified in their minds the image of the white working class as hopelessly conservative. For Nixon, this was a golden opportunity to push forward a strategy that he had been dreaming about. And this dream started by observing the kind of support George Wallace was able to get during the 1968 election. Wallace was the segregationist governor of Alabama and fused populist rhetoric with racist sentiments. Though he didn't win the nomination, he was able to get a significant amount of support from northern white workers. Nixon's advisor, Kevin Phillips, believed a major ethnic realignment was happening. In his book, The Emerging Republican Majority, Phillips argued that a moderate conservatism could win over workers that eventually voted for Democratic candidate Hubert Humphrey, but were very sympathetic to Wallace. Liberals obsessed about this issue as well. Liberal journalist Pete Hamill wrote an article for the New York Magazine called The Revolt of the White Lower Middle Classes that caught Nixon's eye. In it, Hamill argued that the support Wallace got in the North was less about race per se and more about the idea that workers were not respected. Other, louder voices in society were getting the attention and resources. And Hamill warned that it was important for politicians to begin to deal with the growing alienation and paranoia of the working class white man. Any politician who leaves that white man out of the political question does so at a very large risk. Nixon sought out to make a cultural appeal to workers, turning their angle towards the liberal cultural elite and not the economic elite. Even though he didn't want to pursue pro-working class economic policies, he did recognize that it would be hard to appeal to them if he openly attacked the trade union movement. And what followed from this perspective was an incredibly sophisticated strategy towards the labor movement. This is the context in which the Hard Hat Riot happened, and Nixon moved quickly to capitalize on this political opening. On May 20th, 1970, about 9 days after the riot, the Building and Construction Trades Council of Greater New York sponsored a rally of 100,000 people in support of the war. Let's take a look at a clip of how one of the few voices of opposition at this rally was received.
Are you a construction worker?
I'm an apprentice with the Iron Workers. Iron Workers Local 6.
Apparently you don't agree with the purpose of this demonstration.
No, I don't. I don't support President Nixon, and I don't support the war.
Do you anticipate any trouble here today?
No, I don't think so.
Do you think American forces should be withdrawn from Vietnam?
Yes, I do. I don't think we should have ever been there in the first place. I'm against Nixon. I'm against just about everything he stands for. I think that I have two brothers.
He's not speaking for the construction workers. He's all by himself.
What do the construction workers say?
We say that we support our flag, we support our government, we support what they're doing over there. We're supporting our working men, and we're not back of this guy at all. He's one of them, but he has his way. He's an individual. Let me tell you something. He's down here with that sign, not here representing us construction people. We represent that flag. I was stood down here in the last week demonstration. They were tearing it down and bringing it up back and forth on that pole. That flag didn't know which way to go, and we're for that flag, and not what he stands for. He has nothing to do with this, and I wish that the cameras wouldn't be on this guy. He's nothing. That thing shouldn't even be here. That thing shouldn't even be here. It shouldn't even be here. And neither should the sign on that hat. Take his hat.
Now, many blue-collar workers were not necessarily especially pro-war, but they resented what they considered the approach and privilege of the protesters. College students had a draft deferment, something that was not available to most working-class kids. Peter Brennan, the head of the New York building trades, articulated the appeal Nixon had with his members, saying, "What is winning their political loyalty is their admiration for your masculinity. The image of being strong, forceful, and decisive will have a powerful personal appeal with the alienated voter." Nixon followed this up by meeting with 22 New York Union officials at the White House who presented him with a hard hat labeled Commander-in-Chief. Then, in the summer of 1970, Nixon invited afl-cio President George Meany and 60 other labor leaders to the White House on Labor Day. The administration decided to try and pick off labor leaders one by one for support. Nixon's aide, Chuck Colson, suggested an array of tactics like appointing labor representatives to every commission, having an administration official at every labor convention, and fixing possible indictments of friendly labor leaders. But the administration had to balance the courting of union leaders with their main economic priority of fighting inflation. Nixon's Treasury Secretary, Charles Walker, circulated a memo saying that there was no way to fight inflation without reducing the power of some major unions. Nixon made this turn in early 1971 when he suspended the Davis-Bacon Act, which is a law that requires prevailing wage levels for federally supported construction projects. They quickly put it back in place, however, when they feared a big backlash from labor. But then later in the year, they instituted a 90-day wage freeze, which angered afl-cio President George Meany. This turned the labor officialdom against Nixon because there was a limit to how far their support could go without actual material gains in return. But this did not stop Nixon from trying to make cultural appeals to working class people. And incredibly, he intervened in the Republican Platform Committee to make sure no overt attacks on labor were included. The culture war was a central part of his 1972 presidential campaign against Democratic nominee George McGovern. Nixon outlined the strategy in one of his scribbled memos saying, "We should increasingly portray McGovern as the pet radical of Eastern liberalism, the darling of the New York Times, the hero of the Berkeley Hill jet set, Mr. Radical Chic. By November, he should be postured as the establishment's fair-haired boy, and Nixon postured as a candidate of the common man, the working man." In the end, the 1972 election represented a big step towards breaking working-class voters away from the Democratic Party. Despite his tense relationship with the afl-cio leadership, he won 50% of the manual worker vote and 54% of the union vote. Whether they continued to support Republicans did not matter as much as the fact that they were alienated from politics and no longer voting Democrat. With a more demobilized working class, the ruling class found it much easier to carry out its agenda. So now let's fast forward to Donald Trump. Trump was not nearly as smart, sophisticated, or hardworking as Nixon, but he was able to effectively appeal to some sections of the working class in a way Democrats haven't been able to in a long time. And like Nixon, Trump used the building trades as a symbol of the working class his campaign represented. Let's look at Trump bantering with the North American Building Trades Union shortly after winning the presidency in 2017.
And I promise you that America's labor leaders will always find an open door with Donald Trump. Always. Just look at the amazing talent assembled here. We have iron workers, insulators. Never changes, does it, with the iron workers? Now let's hear it. Laborers, painters, fitters, plumbers, operators. They're operators, all right, I'll tell you that. Electricians. Not that good. Where's my local 3? Oh, where's local 3? That wasn't that good. Electrician. Well, they became so rich they don't have to. Let's do that again. Electricians. Oh, that's better. Bricklayers. Boilermakers. Elevator constructors. Good job. Sheet metal workers. Roofers. Plasterers. Plaster. Well, yeah, that's... We're not using as much plaster as we used to, fellas, right? No matter how you cut it. Sorry about that. I'm not sure I can do much. We brought back the coal miners. I'm not so sure about the plasters. We'll do the best we can, okay? We're going to do the best we can. How about the cement masons? And, of course, our wonderful Teamsters. Well, that wasn't very good, James. Huh? But really, you're the backbone of America. With the talent in this room, we can build any city at any time, and we can build it better than anyone.
So thankfully, Trump was not able to fully consolidate his power and win re-election. But the experience of Nixon and Trump just show us that there is no God-given law that keeps working class people or even labor unions tied to the Democratic Party. Especially in a time of crisis, there is vast potential for political and social realignments. If the situation keeps getting more desperate, there is no telling what a more skilled political figure on the right could do to mold a more permanent constituency of workers loyal to the right wing. And Jen, let me ask you a question. Do you think Pete Buttigieg could name all those trades? I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I really like that segment where where Donald Trump is just listing every type of blue collar occupation he can think of. But I really don't think that Pete Buttigieg would be quite as quick with that list. I mean, we saw him on the picket line, kind of awkwardly bantering with people on strike. Do you remember this?
I actually didn't see that video.
Oh,
I would
okay.
love to.
Yeah, I should have gotten that video clip. Yeah. But anyway, for anybody who's watching, go Google Pete Buttigieg on the picket line, and you will have a good laugh.
Yeah, and another thing that's amazing is that, and I didn't put this in the segment, but I should have, that right after Trump got elected, he hosted a meeting of basically like every building trades leader in the country at the White House to try to talk about their priorities and all of that. And unbelievably, in the 8 years of the Obama presidency, they never called a meeting like that. Never reached out or tried to court labor. Kind of just took it for granted. And I think that's very telling. So
I guess to follow up on that, so obviously Trump was like a disaster for workers. We've said that, many times on the show before. But I think what a lot of people kind of, especially like right after he won in 2016, a lot of people were really concerned about the fact that he had gotten something like 43% of the union household vote. Now, obviously, as you say, that wasn't really approaching Nixon levels, but I think it was more. It was more than people had expected. And at least from what I could see, there were kind of two reactions among liberals and leftists to that. So I think among lots of people on the left, the reaction was like, oh my God, this is a huge problem for the Democrats. And I think actually Bernie Sanders went on TV after the election and he was like, I'm deeply ashamed of the Democrats. I'm ashamed that they lost this portion of the union vote. I'm ashamed that they lost a portion of the white working class, which is, the people that I come from. And I agree, I think that speaks ill of the Democrats, the fact that Trump got 43% of the union household votes. However, there was also a different reaction, on the part of liberals and some leftists, where that number was evidence that these union members were somehow reactionary, or that they were somehow clinging to some kind of cultural conservatism, and that this number spoke ill of them rather than the Democratic Party. And I guess just in my opinion, that sentiment kind of bubbles up from time to time. I don't know if you've seen it much, but
yeah, and I think part of this, I think, is kind of a misunderstanding on what Trump tended to focus on in his rallies. Now, that rally was after he won, but, often if you would watch, I understand why people wouldn't want to watch a whole Trump rally, but, I was sometimes surprised that the ratio of xenophobia, racist, sexist comments was actually pretty small sometimes. And especially in a crowd like that, he would really emphasize the jobs part a lot. And again, it's if it's between someone that's doing that and someone like Clinton, who was not doing much of it at all, it becomes hard to parse why exactly workers are voting for Trump. How much of it is due to the bad stuff, how much of it is due to thinking he was pro-worker. It's hard to parse that exactly.
I just want to quickly shout out, there's a really good Christian Parenti essay, which I think is in Jacobin, about this very phenomenon. He sat down and listened to a bunch of Trump speeches, and he came away with the same interpretation. There was a little bit of let's build the wall, but most of it was actually about trade. It was about, withdrawing troops from overseas. It was about protecting Social Security and Medicare. That's kind of it. A lot of it sounded actually very similar to, this is it. Yeah, it's really good. Definitely everybody check it out. But again, it sounded actually very similar to a lot of what Bernie was talking about. And there were times when Trump would say things like crazy Bernie, he's actually right on some things, and I think that was, as you were saying, a very calculated ploy to kind of make his platform seem more worker friendly than it actually was.
Right. And yeah, it's thank God Trump is lazy. Nixon wasn't lazy.
Right.
And that's, I don't know how much longer we have before someone more competent comes along that can kind of have a more sophisticated strategy.
Yeah. So, that's the second thing I wanted to say. You argue, I think rightly, that the left really has to try to win the building trades. And I think, has to try to win blue collar and industrial workers. And I think for a lot of us, that's not controversial, but, you do hear, I think, sometimes, especially again, mostly liberals, but some leftists as well, will tend to act like manufacturing and the industrial trades are relics of a bygone era, or those jobs are disappearing. So we need to reorient around the new working class, which is, service work and healthcare. And obviously those are huge and growing sectors. And they should be unionized, and the left should definitely be fighting for those sectors as well. But I think that argument at its worst is like a kind of demographic destiny type argument, or maybe we should call it like occupational destiny, right? Like, first of all, I don't actually think that manufacturing is as dead as some people make it seem. I mean, just today, Biden released a huge $2 trillion infrastructure plan. Like those are, you know, industrial and manufacturing and construction jobs, some of them. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, we should distinguish a little bit between manufacturing and construction. And what I mean by that, you know, it's one thing making cars, or, you know, the hospitals and the schools and all that are still going to have to get built, you know, and I think, you know, so that kind of construction work, I think, is always going to be happening. And, you know, we still have a decent amount of manufacturing. A lot of it is automated. You know, they're just producing more with less workers and more automation. But yeah, I think it's silly to kind of like dismiss that. And also, you know, it's like, yes, the sad reality is that in many places, the industrial sector is hollowed out and being replaced with other sectors. It's not necessarily inevitable. I think a country like the United States could embark on a federal jobs program that revived manufacturing. Obviously, hard to do that if the left is not in power. But yeah, I don't think it's this inevitable thing that we'll no longer have manufacturing in any capacity.
I guess I'm also kind of, you know, worried that if Democrats and like even parts of the left kind of lean into that message, you're just creating a vacuum for, as you were saying, a Nixon-like figure to try to come in and capitalize on whatever culture war he could gin up, right? So,
right.
Yeah.
For sure.